Welcome to the LinkedIn Famous Podcast, the show where we get real about what it takes to build a personal brand on LinkedIn that gets real business results. We're talking about driving revenue from a personal LinkedIn profile by sharing real and authentic stories and points of view. I'm Brad Zomick, your host and the founder of Spectrumer, a personal brand consultancy that helps founders and executives get LinkedIn famous. Join me for unfiltered conversations from the trenches of LinkedIn. We'll meet CEOs, go-to-market executives, subject matter experts, and company employees with blockbuster LinkedIn results. We'll unpack strategy and leave you with tactical advice to grow your personal brand and demand for your company's products and services. All right, LinkedIn hustlers, it's time to level up. Welcome, LinkedIn movers and makers. I'm excited today to have Sam Jacobs on the show. He is a legend in B2B SaaS and go-to-market circles and a prolific LinkedIn creators. I'll just introduce his background real quick and we'll get to the conversation with Sam. Sam has held various leadership roles, most notably at GLG Group, Livestream, which is now part of Vimeo, and the Muse. He's built sales strategies, teams, and generated hundreds of millions in revenue. He started Pavilion in 2016 to have the community support group that he never had when he was leading go-to-market. Early on, he was the host of the Sales Hacker podcast, another claim to fame, impacted Pavilion's growth in a positive way. The growth has been extraordinary. Today, Pavilion has over 10,000 members and chapters around the world. It started in sales and has spread to customer success, marketing, finance, and CEOs. Pavilion is a community, it's content and in-person events all around learning how to get better together and go to market. Sam is also an author. He wrote the book, Kind Folks Finish First, The Considerate Path to Success in Business and Life. Right now, he co-hosts the Top Line podcast for Pavilion. I'm excited to chat with Sam because he's crossed the Rubicon from a sales leader to an evangelist. He's just a prolific creator. On LinkedIn, his content pillars are the future of go-to-market, profitable growth, and management. He has over 100,000 followers. He hasn't reported his 2024 numbers, but he's reported in 2023. He had over 25 million impressions. He generated $1.5 million in pipeline, a couple of million in free impressions as well. Sam is a true LinkedIn success story and a legend in the B2B space. Sam, anything else you'd like to add in to your background?
No, that's extensive and very kind. So that's pretty comprehensive. I'm good. Thank you, Brad.
Maybe you could tell us something about yourself that the audience couldn't learn from your LinkedIn presence.
They'd have to scroll down. I ran a record label 25 years ago in Charlottesville, Virginia, and then I became a musician. I put out some music on Spotify and all the streamers. But the band that I recorded under was called The Flying Change. That was named after a Pulitzer Prize-winning book of poetry by a guy named Henry Taylor who just passed away. There's something you may not know.
Wow, that's impressive. I'm a music fan, so I will go and check that out. So let's get into it. Let's talk about your LinkedIn journey. It's fair to say that you started fairly early. When I say early, I would say early pandemic, but like before things started exploding. There weren't a lot of case studies that this worked. What motivated and inspired you to start investing in your LinkedIn presence?
I really got serious about it 2.5 years ago. There was a specific catalyst. I would post periodically. My team was always asking me to post more on LinkedIn, and it was pretty random. I think I might have had 15, 20,000 followers, which is not nothing, but probably as a function of me doing the Sales Hacker podcast, just being around for a while in the ecosystem. The specific thing that happened was that I got on a Zoom. This was in the middle of 2022, and everybody was having a pretty bad year. I got on the phone with this guy named Jamal Reimer, who wrote a book called Mega Deal Secrets, basically a book focused on big deals. He was in a good mood. He was smiling, seemed lighter than most of the people I'd been interacting with. So I said, Jamal, what's up? He said, I'm doing great because I started posting actively on LinkedIn. I'm making a ton of money from it. I'm building my audience. I owe it all to my LinkedIn whisperer. I said, who's your LinkedIn whisperer? And he said, it's this guy named Alec Paul. He's the son of Andy Paul, who's a big sales author. He's my coach. I write the content, but he helps sculpt it. I thought that was very interesting. So I set up a call with Alec. We decided to work together. Alec made it clear that if I was going to do something on LinkedIn that was a lot of work, basically. The first year from like July of 2022 to August 23, I was posting 2 times a day, so 10 a.m. and 4 p.m., and once a day on weekends, 12 times per week of original content. Writing and creating was a lot of work. Since then, I've slowed down to about 1 a day, but still working with Alec and doing the stuff that's been working for the last 2 years, 2.5 years. When I started, as I said, I think I was around 20,000 followers. Today, I'm 105,000 followers, or 104, but by the time that people hear this, it'll probably be 105. It's been a great experience, and it's been a lot of fun, and it's helped the business of Pavilion quite a bit, particularly in a time when other marketing channels were less effective, when we needed the help because of the contraction of the tech ecosystem and the venture-backed ecosystem. That's the story, and that's how I got into it.
Was Alec involved from the beginning, or was there a period where you were tinkering yourself? And
I was tinkering, but I didn't have a clear point of view on it. That was 2018 through the first emergent moment, I suppose. I wrote a LinkedIn article, which not a lot of people did, but I wrote a LinkedIn article called The Wrong Way to Scale. It might have been called The Right Way to Scale. That laid out basically a very strong perspective that I have, which I retain, which is that people generally need to invest in marketing before building out a large sales organization, that they need to invest in the act of generating demand before they invest in the act of capturing demand, which is what a sales team does. I said that, and I walked through some specific examples in this article, and that got a lot of interest because I was saying something that everybody felt and knew, but nobody had put a point on. Then I wrote 2 more articles as companion pieces to that. The first was the importance of unit economics. That was the next one after the right or wrong way to scale. And the third was the order of operations. These are just like the pillars of what I think about startup, how to build a startup. Those kind of launched me a little bit. And then I started, but again, my posting was very inconsistent and very sporadic until I connected with Alec and he convinced me that consistency is the name of the game.
Got it. So things really started to click when you started working with Alec. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about how that relationship with Alec works and if it's evolved over time.
Some people assume that it means that I have a ghostwriter. I really don't. I do write all of my own content. Alec he's a producer and an editor. He's a collaborator. I meet with him once a week. We talk about ideas. We talk about what's interesting in a way that's like Rick Rubin or something like that. The point of it being like he's trying to evoke interesting ideas from me. He's presenting me with ideas to react to, and through that, we can figure out what we want to talk about and how we want to talk about it. Also, at the beginning, there was like a messaging exercise where, in a formation exercise, like the point of, when you start, there needs to be, what are you going to write about? That's not as straightforward as it sounds, because you have to find perspectives that you have a strong point of view on, where there is typically an opposing point of view. You almost need to create a narrative and an enemy. From there, you need to also figure out the themes that you want to talk about and what's the voice that you want to talk about. This is a messaging exercise that any brand should do. This just means that the work that you do as an individual creator is similar to the work a company would do. So once you do that, then you can start creating, and then it's the act of creating. But so at the beginning, he was helping me figure out how to present myself, what to say, who the enemy was, why I hated them or whatever, which is, again, basic messaging stuff. And from there, it's a matter of meeting. First of all, part of it's like personal trainer. It's like just making sure that I do it, making sure that I'm accountable to somebody. Then it's helping me figure out what's going to work, what's working across his portfolio of clients, and then deciding which direction I want to head. Despite my success on LinkedIn, there's probably, Alex said yesterday, there's probably 20 to 30% of things I believe very strongly that I don't write about on LinkedIn because I just feel like they will be too inflammatory. It's funny when people walk up to me and they see me as like a fairly low-key, kind person, and they're like, that's not what I expected you to be. I think there's definitely a wide group of people that interprets my tone on LinkedIn as arrogant and condescending. I'm not trying to be that way. I'm trying to be direct and matter of fact, but that's how some people interpret a lack of ambiguity as arrogance. But my point is, I'm already doing that anyway. I don't need to be even more incendiary by, as one of my friends said, stroking cultural erogenous zones.
I've read a lot of your stuff, and I don't think it's too controversial. I happen to think when you look at some other people who are out there who are kicking the beehive, so to speak, like Adam Robinson, how many hours are you spending on your LinkedIn efforts per week?
5 to 10.
Okay. That's a considerable amount. I think Robinson reports maybe doing something similar, if not maybe 3 to 4 hours a day. It's
I
a
mean,
lot, but yeah.
Adam's a friend of mine. The funny thing about him is that he's quite a nice person in person, but also he believes everything he writes. I think that's why sometimes people see him, they say, I want to be like that. I had a moment where I was telling Alec that we needed to create the LCU, like the LinkedIn character universe, and have like crossover themes and crossover narratives. And I related that to the Real Housewives of LinkedIn, which is basically a way of saying creating like fake or artificial conflict as like a storyline. Again, where I came out on that is I tried a few posts like that, and I'm happy to have debates, interesting debates, but I'm really not trying to be like a shock jock.
By the way, I love that Marvel Cinematic Universe reference. I was a comic book collector as a kid. You got me. Actually, I'd love to have the LinkedIn character universe on my podcast over the coming months and years.
I think we do it, but and Adam does it better than me because Adam took Alina out on a boat with Chris Walker when we were all at GTM, our conference in Austin in October. I think there's like this idea of can we create opportunities to overlap and interact with each other, which we're doing in New Orleans in January for the Pavilion CEO Summit.
That is amazing. Question for you related to the time investment, and you probably spend, Adam Robinson example, maybe extreme, 5 to 10 hours a week for the CEO is the backstop of all the problems in a company is a considerable amount of time. What do you say to all the CEOs there's a lot of people who want to make a splash on LinkedIn, but they're barely willing to invest an hour or two a week? What's your advice to them?
One of the things Alec does is helps reformat less controversial ideas into more controversial ideas so that they get deeper engagement. When I say to CEOs, if you're not posting on LinkedIn, you're not doing your job, I don't actually believe that. I think to be posting regularly on LinkedIn or any social media, you have to be good at it, which means you have to be a really good communicator with something interesting to say and some kind of authentic point of view that you can draw from on a regular basis. Which, by the way, that doesn't mean I think I'm so great. There's lots of areas where I'm not particularly good. I'm not a particularly good manager, I don't think. I'm not particularly disciplined or organized from a process perspective, even though I do spend a lot of time on LinkedIn. My point is there's lots of CEOs that are just better at different things. If you come from a technical background and you're an incredible engineer, you might not be a comfortable communicator, but you might be so good at building great product that it doesn't matter. Certainly, most companies are pretty big companies don't have their CEO in the public eye all the time. But one way or the other, I would say that being on LinkedIn, especially in the B2B space, is effectively like media training. Like it is a skill that you should have a point of view at least. If you're not posting, you should have decided why you're not. That certainly doesn't obviate the need for a vanity URL, like making your profile look and the way that it should look as a representation of your company. If people want my advice, the main advice is the same thing as anything in life. Malcolm Gladwell, 10,000 hours kind of deal, which is just consistency. The thing that trips people up, which is the same thing in songwriting or music or any artwork or any kind of mode of creation, which is like people think that the act of building one thing is special. Any creator knows that it's not special at all and it's not interesting. What's interesting is your ability to repeatedly create and create even when you don't feel like it. So the thing that flames most people out is that they spend like an inordinate amount of time on a few early posts, and they're like long essays that clearly they labored over for a long time. Of course, nothing much happens with them because it's a highly competitive market for attention that includes TikTok, Instagram, naked humans, and and dancing bunnies. So we got to be pretty damn interesting. But that only comes from practice and from showing up every day. The problem is most CEOs try it. They feel like there isn't a strong ROI. But in their defense, Howard Stern was interviewing Jerry Seinfeld. Jerry Seinfeld is a famous workaholic in terms of how much time he spends writing jokes and thinking about the world and jotting down notes in his notepad. The point is that Howard said to Jerry, some people are just not willing to put in the work. Jerry's answer was, it's not about work ethic, Howard, it's about love. Michael Jordan loved basketball. I love comedy. You love what you do. My point is there's a strong correlation between being good at something and liking it and enjoying it, right? It's not super often. It's certainly possible, but it's not super often that somebody's great at something and just hates doing it. One of the reasons that some people might not like doing it is because they're not very good at it and they recognize that they're not very good at it. I think in that instance, they should deploy their skills where they are particularly good, their superpower. Sometimes it is that they like doing it, they're good at it, but they just need some kind of structure in order to sharpen and harness their skill towards more consistency. In that case, again, the answer is always just keep doing it. Just keep writing. Just sit down and write. That's hard. I will tell you, I think we can all smell AI breath at this point, but this is a good use for ChatGPT. This is a good use for large language models. Not the writing of the post, but the brainstorming of the ideas. What's an interesting angle? What new perspective can I take on this? AI is an incredible thing. Part of what's incredible about it is I really think that it's a really useful thought partner that always wants to listen. So it's something to interact with, because the hardest part of like creation is the blank page. So to get something that you can respond to, and frankly, that's a lot of what Brian Eno talks about, which is the act of responding to something can be a form of creation as opposed to the act of the original creation of it. Like instead of having a blank page, it's okay, respond to this note, respond to this sound. Then with your keyboard, but write against this chord. We're going to play in G. Anyway, this is all music stuff, but the point is AI can be super useful in that regard.
I get that as a fan of music, and I used to play music in a jazz band way back in the day in high school. You're playing off other people.
It's just a way to start, even if it's someone to bounce the ball to you so that you can do something with it. Yes, it's AI. It's not going to be great, but you can interact with it.
Are you using ChatGPT or Claude?
ChatGPT. I'm sure I should try Claude. Right now I'm using ChatGPT. I've uploaded our board decks. I've uploaded like all our all hands presentations. I've uploaded my last 8 weekly investor updates. I'm using ChatGPT to like find inconsistencies in our strategy and then formulate a business plan.
The sky's the limit with what you can do with
it's so cool.
AI these days.
I'm sure that you're tired of talking about it. It's just a fun toy.
I know, I get it. I use it every day. Not necessarily for the writing, but again, brainstorming, editing, polishing. It is a tool. I think especially we're always trying to be more productive, where everyone who's running a business and in the business is strapped for time. I appreciate the sentiment and the insights. I also just want to go back to one thing. You talked about being consistent over the long period of time. I think it's a great call out. Brands aren't really built overnight. And essentially, you got to start somewhere. You got to keep on going. And it's really compound interest that you're probably benefiting from today. It just keeps on growing and growing. Speaking of compound interest, you mentioned all the many great benefits to posting on LinkedIn, the audience building, revenue. I'm curious, what other things have come out of your LinkedIn presence? Maybe some of them not obvious or even surprising.
First, the obvious one is that there's like an influencer economy at this point. I get access to companies that want access to me. Those are really interesting opportunities and discussions, sometimes for partnerships, sometimes for investment. When Clay.com is coming to me to want to work with me, when they are one of the coolest companies that's been built in the last couple of years, that's pretty neat. One of the benefits is, as with all things, is like some level of access to deal flow, access to other people that are interesting. It's called LinkedIn famous, right? So what's the benefit of being famous? One of the benefits is like you have a higher order of people that you can talk to, interact with, have a conversation with, especially because I have a podcast too. People are inclined to jump on, like Adam or Alina or Peter Walker from Carta or some of these other folks. I think it redounds to the benefit of Pavilion, and in that case, it's also to my benefit. I would say that it's interesting. One of the reasons that I like it, I am the founder of Pavilion. For a long time before I took on investors, there was no daylight between me and Pavilion. They were the same thing. Now they're not. Once you raise money, the company is its own thing. It's still a huge part of my life. I can't quit, or I don't want to quit, but like I'm indelibly attached to it. But at the same time, my LinkedIn audience and my book are two things that are mine. Most things that I do belong to Pavilion one way or the other. And it's actually nice to have an asset that will live with me. To your point about compound interest, it'll live with me forever, hopefully. And as long as LinkedIn continues to grow, to your point, 105,000 followers today, 22,000 2.5 years ago, 2.5 years from now, maybe it'll be 200,000. That's a lot of people.
Indeed. I guess the world will be your oyster if and when you exit from Pavilion.
I have diet pills that I can sell to people and like swampland in Florida.
You can bring your band back and make that LinkedIn famous. Switching gears a little bit, you work with companies, you probably advise some CEOs. For the ones who are interested in dipping their foot in the LinkedIn pool, what do you advise them when they're just getting started?
It's the same thing I advise people that are investing in marketing. The first thing I say is you should invest in marketing before sales, and people furrow their brows. Then I explain that hiring a bunch of salespeople doesn't create pipeline, and you need pipeline before you need salespeople to close the pipeline. They say, got it. They say, okay, Sam, I hired a head of demand generation. That's marketing. Nothing's really happening. Because the problem with all of this stuff is that you can't get started tomorrow. You can. What do you need to do? When's the best time to plant a tree? The answer to the question is the first thing you need to do is figure out who you are and what you stand for, which is a funny thing because that's the answer to doing anything in life. It's like before you start running, figure out which direction you want to go running in. So some people have done that. Some people haven't. Or some people fundamentally, they just don't get it. They just don't get organic content marketing. Like they still don't understand that like you can present a message to somebody and it doesn't have to say buy my thing. They just are like, why would I write a post that isn't obviously selling Clary or Sales Loft or whatever? You're like, because nobody wants to read that. You don't want to read that either. The point is there needs to be some kind of positioning messaging workshop where you can get to that company and get them on the same page. This is a long game. Brand is demand gen investment. It's a 5-year demand gen investment. It takes a long time, like you said, Brad, to build a brand. You got to be in it for the long term. Now, you should do it because the problem with people in short-term thinking is they just don't believe tomorrow's going to come. But it comes. It's here. You and me got a lot of gray in our beard. We were kids one day. We didn't think we'd get old. Here we are, old. And nobody thinks they're going to get old. Everybody thinks that next year is too far away. Who cares about the auto-renew? Just sign the deal, and we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. But right now we need new bookings. I think that companies need to, if they take a long-term view and if they figure out who they are and what they stand for, then the messaging can flow from there. But if they skip that step, which is, again, it's like a lesson for everything. You skip the strategy and the planning step and you jump right into implementation, it's not going to scale.
By the way, I love that rant. Having been in-house as the content demand generation marketer, head of marketing, I've worked for a lot of CEOs who just don't get marketing. It's amazing to have someone in your position who has the back of marketing, kind of gets it. Too many times I've been, where are the leads?
That's
Meanwhile,
like,
there's some
what do we
some
do?
Other, yeah.
That's what... I hired a demand gen person one time. This is when I learned this. And I was like, where's the leads? She said, I'll run some ads, but what do you want the ads to say? And I was like, I don't know. Tell them to buy our thing. She's like, yeah, nobody wants that.
We're rounding the corner to the end of the podcast. Looking at the LinkedIn platform today, if you had a magic wand, is there anything that you wish you could change?
I think they do a pretty good job, to be honest with you. I'm sure they're right. When I say short form video, like I really don't feel like becoming a TikTok creator, but on the other hand, if that's what everybody's doing, then it's either going to be me or somebody else. LinkedIn's heavily pushing short form video. I have to decide if I want to get in on that. Now, I'm talking to you today from a new apartment, but yeah, I've got a call later this week with a guy that's going to help me set up a studio with better lighting so that when you look at me on Riverside, it looks better. I think I'm going to be investing in video. I think LinkedIn does a great job because I think they try to be pretty intentional about what they promote. I think it's pretty useful. I find lots of good content on there.
Yeah, I'm a big fan myself, hence the podcast. What's interesting about video, I think there's two dynamics in play. Number one is people's attention span. I think also from a creator standpoint, there's a competition. You got in and maybe the second wave of LinkedIn. There were some people that started pre-2020. Those guys are hotshots now. John Barrows, Morgan Ingram. It's all the same community.
Justin Welsh.
Justin Welsh, yeah, he probably started just right before. But I think for all the people who are jumping in now, there's a lot of people writing texts. So video is just a scroll-stopping tool to get more juice out of the platform. I like that. I'm dabbling in video. There'll be some video clips from this podcast, of course.
Let's
too.
go.
Assuming the video is working. Who do you think right now is crushing it on LinkedIn? You mentioned a couple of those people earlier, Alina, Adam Robinson. Maybe in particular, who are you following and learning from?
I learned from Jason Lemkin still. I learned from Peter Walker at Carta. I learned from Asad Zaman, who I run a podcast with at Sales Talent Agency. I learned from Nick Mehta. I learned from Aaron Levy. Most of my Aaron Levy stuff comes through Twitter, not LinkedIn. I find what he has to say really interesting. I like Adam's stuff. I think it's really interesting, scary because of how transparent he is, but I get a lot of value from it. I like Greg Portnoy, who's been talking. He talks about partnerships because he's got a partnership app. I love Asher Matthew as a person, but he's just been copying my posts and then adding partnerships in there. That's been funny. But I like Lemkin. She's got a lot. You always feel something. You always want to respond to it. You always think like there's a point of view there that I have to think about whether I agree with or not, which I think is awesome.
That's great. There's a lot of inspiration there for our listeners. To wrap things up, is there anything going on at Pavilion that you want to share or promote?
Yeah, of course. I'm doing this thing on ChatGPT, but I'm also reading Tomorrow and Tomorrow, which is about video game creation partially. I'm like, maybe I can turn this into a game. My point is, if you're an aspiring sales executive and you haven't taken CRO school, I think that's a big gap in your resume. I might be building a video game to challenge you on your skills and knowledge around go-to-market. I think people should take CRO school. If you're a CEO listening to this and you want to talk to me about this stuff, come to our CEO Summit in New Orleans, January 22nd, 23rd. We're doing an AI for go-to-market workshop. We're doing a visualization mastermind with my coach. We'll be there. Adam will be there. Alina will be there. Chris Walker will be there. Peter Walker will be there. So it's going to be a great time to meet a bunch of amazing influencers.
That sounds like a blast. If you enjoyed this podcast, you can find Sam on LinkedIn, also the Top Line Podcast. Anywhere else people can find you? A newsletter, etc.?
I don't have a newsletter yet. I think they should listen to Top Line, read my stuff on LinkedIn, and if they're in Barcelona, they can ping me and we can grab a coffee.
All right. Sam, thank you so much for your insights and perspective. Very enlightening. We'll see you out there in the LinkedIn feed.
Thanks for having me, Brad. Appreciate it.
If you enjoyed this episode, follow Brad and Spectimer on LinkedIn for hot takes and tactical executive branding advice. For the readers in the audience, subscribe to LinkedIn Famous on Substack. And if you really love this episode, leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or the podcasting platform of your choice. Until next time, stay bold, authentic, and keep on creating.